Hello, everyone, and welcome to At Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to our guest, Ray McGuire, president of Lazard. Ray, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Andy. How have you been?
Doing great, doing great. So I know you just joined Lazard in April, but I want to ask you what your remit is. What are you doing there as president?
You're right, I joined Lazard April the 3rd. And so my remit is to take the experiences I've had and the relationships that I have been able to develop over almost 4 decades and to bring it to this brand, which is clearly one of the most storied brands that exist over 175-year history, and see if we can help to leverage a brand and to have it be commensurate with what its history has stood for.
So Lazard, for people who aren't so familiar with the company, is strong in the investment business and also in the advisory business. Can you talk a little bit about the company and the business?
Yeah, let's expand that a little bit. We have a financial advisory business. Within that, we do have financial advisory. We have private capital market raising. We have venture capital growth, and we also have capital market solutions within the advisory business. We also should acknowledge and recognize that we have Lazard Asset Management, which I think of the last quarterly note, we had probably $225 to $230 billion under management. We continue to invest in that business, having acquired a wealth management platform by the name of Truvo. So when you think about Lazard, we need to think about it holistically. In addition to the asset management business and the advisory business, we're global. So this is a brand that has traveled around the world, given advice to some of the most important sovereigns and leaders that exist in the corporate and government space.
Ray, as you noted, you've worked on Wall Street for a while. You started at First Boston, worked at Citi for a number of years. What's different about Lazard versus those firms and, say, other firms?
It is the history of this firm having had an impact across the corporate landscape, across the sovereign landscape. There are very few firms, very few, that have such storied history, that have as many talented and recognized advisors globally. And so what is different about this platform is the storied history, is the impact it's had on the world of finance for a long time, for 175 years. There are very few firms that either have existed or exist today that have had the kind of impact that Lazard has had and continues to have.
You mentioned the recent earnings report by your company, and I guess you could sort of characterize it as cautiously optimistic. There are headwinds in the advisory business right now, higher interest rates, maybe an unfriendly administration in Washington when it comes to deal making. What's your take on what that business is facing right now?
You're right to have pointed out some of the headwinds. Let's think about this a bit more granularly. And, the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 11 times, 525 basis points. So we have the Fed in their actions. We have inflation. We have a global supply chain challenge. We have the DOJ and the FTC challenging many of the more strategic combinations. So I think those headwinds are subsiding a bit. We'll see how that plays out. It's too early to say how the world is going to evolve, but today we see some green shoots, and we continue to think more positively about how the future is going to unfold. Cautiously optimistic is, I think, the appropriate way to describe it.
Ray, you're a Democrat. We'll talk about your political leanings in a minute. How do you reconcile that with deal making, where we talked about, both of us mentioned Washington being unfriendly, saying that these deals maybe are anti-competitive, maybe hurting consumers, maybe not so great for the country? How do you reconcile being a Democrat and a deal maker at the same time?
Well, I'm not quite certain that there's any reconciliation needed. Party affiliations exist. Deals exist independent of party affiliation. So yes, I've been a lifelong Democrat. But having said that, I don't think that is that deal making and party affiliation is synonymous. I think they're separate. We need to separate them out. We need to understand the environment in which we're operating. But I wouldn't sync those up and say that because of one, that by definition has an impact on the other. I think we're moving forward independent of the exogenous factors that are having impact with CEOs and boardrooms. We're moving forward, and I think people have to think strategically about how we continue to compete and lead on a global corporate landscape.
Talked about those 11 rate hikes and people suggesting maybe we're more at the end than the beginning or even the middle with the rate hikes. What is your take on the economy though right now, Ray?
Cautiously optimistic. If I look at, this feels more like 2001 than it does 2008. The Fed has taken a lead here, and as a result of, we got COVID, we had a tightening with the Fed. We also have an inflationary environment. So those factors, and then the geopolitical environment, I got geoeconomics, I got geopolitics, all those factors converged at the end of 21 to bring us to where we are today. Remember, we hit a peak in 21 across the landscape: capital raising, deal making, capital markets involvement. We hit a peak in 21, and then we began to slowly decline. And then in January, February, the first quarter of 22, the Fed began to tighten, and we see the impact of that. We go from a relatively low to no cost of capital to relatively expensive cost of capital. All these things will come into play now. So maybe it's going to be a little higher longer, but I'm cautiously optimistic given some of the things we're seeing in the marketplace.
Now, let me pick up on that higher longer notion, because a lot of people are talking about a rate plateau at this point. Is that something that you're in accord with? And if so, or even if not, if so, what does the current environment tell you about the advisory business and the asset management business going forward? How does that inform your thinking?
It informs it by, I've lived through probably 4 or 5 cycles, Andy. And what the current environment suggests is that I think we're closer to the bottom. And the number of conversations and the level at which these conversations are taking place to drive to that involve strategic dialogue. How will corporations grow organically and inorganically? How will they address what I call the 5 macro trends? They are generative AI, there's energy transition, there's deglobalization or reshoring, there is aging, and then there's cybersecurity, given how much our lives are impacted by mobile devices and digitization. So those 5 factors at a macro level will inform how we continue to grow and interact globally.
Publicly traded security, Lazard has. Everybody's public now on Wall Street, almost everybody. What makes that stock appealing to investors, say, versus a JPM or an MS?
Well, if I look, again, I go to the foundation of each of these franchises, each of these firms, and I look at the leadership that our firm has demonstrated through decades, almost centuries here of advising. Again, some of the most complex and complicated transactions for the most sophisticated and demanding CEOs and boards around the world. And as we continue to invest in that business with the best talent, it's all about talent, that can go and develop trusted advisor relationships, then we will continue to be in the dialogue. And in many instances, at the forefront of that dialogue. We are here to win on behalf of our clients and put the best talent with the best ideas and the best execution in front of our clients. Others can claim that. We have a history of actually demonstrating that. And so we'll continue to do that and fulfill not only the promise of what we've done historically, where we fulfill that promise, but the promise of the future, where we intend to continue to lead.
All right, you mentioned talent. What's going on in the office, in the workplace at Lazard? Are all the young people back at work? Do they have to come into work? Is Ray going into work? What's the story with that?
They talk about a 5-day week. I'm here 6 days. And I was inspired this morning, Andy. I talked to our beginning analyst group, of which there are 80 or so globally. And I couldn't have been more inspired. I went through the resumes and looked at the resumes. They are amongst the best and the brightest. Just intellectual curiosity, intellectual talent, demonstrated leadership organizationally in their colleges and universities. I couldn't be more excited about the future. I couldn't be more proud of the class. We interacted, they asked questions. My rules of engagement for a group like this is either they ask me questions or I ask them questions. They took the lead. And so I was so inspired by that group and continue to be inspired by that group and others of the people who have decided they want to come into the world of finance. And they have taken the decision that of all the choices they've had, and if you look at these resumes, they had varied choices. They decided to begin their careers at Lazard.
What is your advice? I mean, you started at the bottom, work your way up to the top. What is
Start
your
at the bottom,
advice?
now we're here.
What is your advice for young people who want to go work on Wall Street?
Get a skill set. Make certain that you have a skill set that is as solid as it can be. Maintain your curiosity. And remember, this is an investment that we're making in their careers and their future. And in exchange for that, we expect for them to come and invest in our firm. And so it is a symbiotic relationship where we expect and intend to continue to train those people who are considered today as they enter amongst the best and the brightest. And as they evolve and get well trained and get the experience and develop relationships, will be considered leaders in the field. That's the objective.
Are young people different today? I mean, a lot of people say, you know, they want to do their own thing. They got to have a lot of perks, but maybe the bloom is off the rose now because of the job market shifting a little bit. What's your take?
I think they remain curious. I've gone through the cycles where we've had concierge services and you have the community rooms and all that. There's still a request and demand for that, but I think people want to be engaged. There's one young man who is here every day that I'm here. I call him my wingman, and he's here every day. I come in on Monday morning, cut the lights on, and he's right there after me. And I use him as a proxy for, I think, what's going to take place with the future. Will there be this notion of work-life balance? Yes, there will be. But I think there's also the intention by this group, at least the ones with whom I met this morning, to be focused and dedicated so they can get a skill set and go and make a difference in the world.
Now, that's the way to get ahead in work, which is to be there before your bosses and then stay later than he or she is.
That's a tough task to do because I get here early and I leave, at the appropriate time.
Got it. Some management changes at Lazard. Obviously, you've come on board, but also Peter Orszag is going to be taking over in October from Ken Jacobs. What's that all about? And is there a new direction here? This has been in the works for quite some time. When I began conversations with Peter and Ken, Peter and I used to work together at Citi, and I've known Ken for 3 decades. So as we were in conversations and we talked about the transition in leadership, Peter will clearly have his view about the future. We've shared some of those thoughts, and when he begins his tenure in October, we'll see a lot of that outlined and a lot of that being described to the public. I mentioned I wanted to talk a little more politics with you. You ran for mayor of New York City not long ago and did not win. What did you learn from that? And would you give it another go at some point, Ray?
You mean, spoiler alert, I didn't win and I'm sitting there talking to you? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So listen, I was inspired by being in the arena. I'm sobered by the reality of the conditions of so many. And so I thought that I could take when I came to New York City, as I said, I had 3 things. I had a great education, I had a lot of debt, and I had no money. This city has been great to me and my family. And I thought if I could take my lived experiences and be involved in the leadership of this city, then I could do some of the things at scale that I've been able to do as a private citizen. That passion, that desire to make a difference remains. But you got to understand the condition of so many is worse today than it has been in a long time. So the idea, the motivation was to go to see if we couldn't impact the lives of the least of thee. And that's why I decided to get into the arena.
So a lot of people say conditions in New York and other big cities, particularly San Francisco, are maybe dire is too strong word, but need a lot of work. What can be done?
We need to invest in communities. We need to invest in the educational system. If I look at where we are today, relative to where we were from 1940 to 1968, we've made advances done in the Warren Court. And many of those advances now being rolled back. And so what we can do is redouble our efforts to make certain that those who have the promise, all of whom include us, that who have the promise of the American dream should be given the opportunity. One, to be educated. You look at the nation's report card and you see the impact of the abject failure that exists in the public school system today. We need to give our students, our people, the opportunity to get educated so they can have a better life than the life which many of them are currently leading. I'd invest in the educational system. I'd invest in youth programs. I'd invest in what takes place between 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock when there's such a great need, because the lure of things that are not so positive is much greater. So I'd invest there. Education programs in the urban cities around the country, and being mindful of, while we've made progress, we still have a ways to go. Bridging the divide of wealth and race and gender and religion. We need to make certain that rather than divide, we come together. And so that's the objective each of us should share, because we're going to be much greater together than we are apart.
This spring, you were the Class Day speaker at Harvard Business School. What did you tell the graduating students?
I tried to deliver a few messages, one of which is that they will have a choice. There's a choice between the wealth they generate and the lives they impact. And today, that it could be more profound than when I said it a few weeks ago. There's a choice that we have. And that choice is a choice whether or not we can go and have an impact on the lives of others, especially those who are less well off, who don't have the same opportunities that we have. And so I told those students that they have the opportunity. They can choose to decide whether or not it's a responsibility or obligation. They have the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of those who are less fortunate. And isn't that legacy? Isn't that what this journey should include? I can't tell you that's what it's all about, but it should be included. Families, we have to take care of our families first. I'm blessed with an extraordinary family. We've got to take care of our families first, but then we got to take care of those people who don't have the wherewithal, don't have the opportunity to take care of themselves.
Speaking of Harvard, Ray, you have degrees from Harvard College, Harvard Law School, HBS. Harvard has just lost a high-profile affirmative action case in the Supreme Court, though. And I wonder what your take is on that case and affirmative action in general.
So we should be on high alert, Andy, given the rollback that we see. And we saw that in affirmative action. We saw a rollback with a woman's right to choose. The rights that we have fought hard for so many years are now being challenged. And I talked the other day to Clarence B. Jones, who was the right-hand deputy to Martin Luther King Jr., whose book just came out, The Last Lion. And I think the book says, if the lions don't tell the stories, then the hunters will. And so I look at that, I look at the advances, and I look at the retreat that is being mounted by many. We're better than this. This country has to stand up for that which is right. What do they call the inalienable rights? And what did he say in the letter from Birmingham, Jim? That what affects an inescapable garment of destiny. What affects one of us affects all of us. And so we need to be mindful of that. I'm mindful of Heschel and King and the message that they gave us. We need to invoke those messages. We need to invoke those lessons so that our best days are ahead of us. And that's the commitment that we ought to make to the next generation. Let's do that which we can to make certain that our best days are ahead of us.
Speaking of the future and shifting gears, I want to finally ask you about AI, which has implications all across the board in our economy and society. Is AI something we should be fearful of, Ray, or what is your thinking on it?
I'd embrace it as a tool, as an asset, which, if used appropriately, can advance healthcare, as an example. Could advance how we think about research in healthcare. Just as an example, as we think about automation and digitization, it can help there. it will never replace human contact. It will never replace that which we all aspire to, that is the ability to exercise clear judgment, clear and thoughtful judgment. So it will never be able to replace that. Will enable us to give us the tools to be able to do that maybe a bit more efficiently. Yes, effectively. I can't say effectively. I can say efficiently. Careful word choice. So the use of AI to improve our ability to behave more efficiently, yes, but it will never, ever, ever supplement or obsolete judgment, human interaction, the care and love that we all give to each other, and that which makes us who we are. So I applaud the advances in AI. As I said, it's one of the major macro factors which we'll have to deal. So I welcome it as a potential tool.
Ray McGuire, president of Lazard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.